She wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thought in everyone's mind. A poor girl, her shoes worn thin, her uniform faded from too many washes, walking into a place that seemed built for royalty. The grand school gates, polished floors, and children arriving in shiny cars all screamed one truth: she did not belong. As she stepped into the courtyard, whispers spread like wildfire. Some students covered their mouths to laugh, others pointed openly. The daughters and sons of wealthy businessmen, politicians, and doctors stared at her as though she were an intruder trespassing on sacred ground. Her head was lowered, clutching her books tightly against her chest. She had walked miles just to be here. Every step felt heavier under the weight of 100 disbelieving eyes. In this school, money was power, status was everything, and she had neither. The teachers, too, seemed skeptical. One muttered quietly to another, "Who allowed her in?" Another shook her head, as though already convinced the girl would never keep up. The poor girl could feel the judgment surrounding her like a thick fog, suffocating but impossible to escape. And yet there was something about her presence that was different. She was quiet, but her eyes carried a spark that refused to be dimmed. She had fought to be here, earned her place through sheer determination. This was not a gift of charity. It was the result of long nights, endless studying, and a dream that would not die no matter how many times life tried to crush it. Still, the rich children saw none of that. To them, she was just a poor girl who didn't belong. Some smirked, whispering insults under their breath. "Look at her shoes. She'll never last here. Why waste a seat on someone like her?" But then something happened. She entered the assembly hall, a space so magnificent it seemed to swallow her whole. The chandeliers glistened, the polished floor reflected her small figure, and the laughter of the privileged echoed around her. She looked fragile, out of place, until she raised her head. For the first time, the entire hall went silent. No one expected it. The quiet confidence in her eyes, the unspoken strength in her stance made even the loudest whispers fade away. She was not there to blend in, she was there to prove something. They thought she didn't belong, but what none of them knew was that this poor girl would soon leave a mark on this school, and on their lives that they would never forget. She was born into a world that had already decided her limits. Her home was not the wide halls of luxury, but a single dimly lit room on the edge of the city. The roof leaked when it rained. The walls cracked in the heat of summer. Her bed was a thin mat on the floor, and her school bag was stitched together from scraps of fabric her mother had begged from neighbors. Her mother, or in some versions, her grandmother, was her anchor. A woman with tired hands and weary eyes, carrying the weight of survival day after day. She sold vegetables in the market, washed clothes for the rich, or cleaned houses where children her daughter's age lived, surrounded by toys and tutors. Every coin earned was stretched thin, food first, rent second, dreams last. But even in poverty, the girl carried one treasure, a dream: education. To her, school was not just about books. It was a key, a door, a chance at a world where hunger wasn't the loudest sound in her stomach. She studied under a flickering candle, memorizing lessons from torn second-hand books. And every night before sleep she whispered the same prayer: "One day I will study in a real school. One day I will prove I am worth more than what the world thinks." That day came, but not in the way anyone expected. A scholarship program, a charity initiative, or perhaps even a clerical error. Something opened a door that should have remained forever closed. Her name was placed on the admission list of an elite school, a place known for marble floors, imported uniforms, and children who spoke with confidence as though they already owned the world. When her mother received the letter, she wept, half with joy, half with fear. "How will you ever fit in among them?" she whispered. But the girl only smiled. "I don't want to fit in, Mama, I just want to learn." Her first day was a battlefield. She wore the cheapest version of the school uniform, slightly faded, slightly loose, donated by a neighbor whose daughter had outgrown it. Her shoes were scuffed, their soles thin enough that water seeped in when she stepped through puddles. She carried a bag that had been patched so many times it was more stitches than cloth. As she walked through the tall iron gates, her heart pounded. For her, it was like stepping into another world. The air smelled different, perfumed, expensive. Cars lined up outside, sleek and shining. Doors opening to reveal children carrying branded bags and polished shoes that had never known dirt. The whispers began instantly. Who is she? Look at her bag. Did she get lost? Laughter followed. Some students pointed, others covered their mouths while giggling. A group of girls with ribbons in their hair smirked openly, their eyes traveling from her shoes to her uniform, dissecting every imperfection. She heard every word, felt every stare, but she didn't stop walking. Inside the classroom, things grew worse. The teacher introduced her. This is our new student. But instead of polite claps or welcoming smiles, there was silence. Then muffled chuckles. Someone whispered loudly enough for all to hear. She looks like she came from the servants' quarters. Her seat was at the back, next to a boy who shifted his chair slightly away, as if she carried something contagious. She placed her books tattered secondhand on the desk and kept her head down. But inside, her heart burned. They saw her torn bag. They saw her worn-out shoes. They saw the cracks in her uniform. But what they did not see was the fire in her eyes, a fire that poverty could not extinguish, a determination that laughter could not erase. At lunchtime, she ate the simplest of meals, flatbread wrapped in old newspaper, while around her, classmates pulled out sandwiches, burgers, and snacks packed in shiny boxes. One girl wrinkled her nose and said, "That smells weird." Another whispered, "Does she even know how to use a fork?" But the girl didn't respond. She had grown used to hunger, to stares, to whispers. What they didn't know was that she had faced far worse outside these walls. Nights without food, days walking barefoot to fetch water, hours spent working alongside her mother just to survive. Compared to those battles, the laughter of spoiled children was nothing more than background noise. Yet deep inside, she felt the sting. She was human after all. When the day ended, she walked home with heavy steps. Her mother waited by the door, searching her face. "How was it?" she asked softly. The girl hesitated, then forced a smile. It was different. She didn't want to burden her mother with the cruelty she had faced. Instead, she tightened her resolve. "I will not let them break me," she whispered to herself that night. "I came here to learn, and learn I will." They thought she was weak, an outsider who didn't belong. But every insult was fuel. Every stare was a spark, and soon, the fire inside her would be impossible to ignore. The days that followed her first step into the elite school were not just difficult, they were merciless. Each morning, as she tied the frayed laces of her old shoes, she prepared not just for lessons but for battle. Her battlefield was not fought with swords or shields, but with whispers, laughter, and silent stares, sharp enough to cut her dignity to pieces. From the moment she entered the gates, the routine began. Heads turned. Some students smirked, others rolled their eyes as though her very presence lowered the school standards. Girls whispered into manicured hands, "Look at her skirt, it's faded again. She smells like the market. Why does she even come here?" Boys laughed loudly, pointing at her patched bag. One even joked, "Careful, don't sit next to her, the stitches might burst and everything will fall out." The laughter spread like wildfire. But what cut deeper was not just the mockery of students, it was the subtle dismissal of teachers. During math class, when she raised her hand timidly to answer a problem, the teacher glanced at her worn-out uniform and said, "Let's hear from someone else. Maybe you should listen more first." The implication was clear. You are not good enough to know the answer. In literature, while others read aloud with polished accents, the teacher sighed impatiently when it was her turn. "Read slowly," she instructed, though the girl was already careful. She wasn't praised when she got it right. She wasn't encouraged when she stumbled. She was invisible, or worse, underestimated. In a world built for the wealthy, poverty was not just a burden, it was a brand. And on her the mark was clear. She was poor, and therefore she was dismissed. Among the sea of privileged children, one stood out for his cruelty. His name carried weight in the school. His father was a businessman, his mother an influential socialite. He was tall, confident, and used to being obeyed. And from the moment he noticed her, she became his favorite target. "Hey, beggar girl," he would call across the hallway. "Did you sleep on the street last night?" His friends roared with laughter. At lunch, he once grabbed her simple meal of flatbread and tossed it into the trash. "We don't eat garbage here," he sneered. Her stomach growled, but her pride forced her to sit silently. The teacher paired them together. She worked tirelessly on her part, researching, writing, and even hand-drawing diagrams late into the night under candlelight. But when presentation day came, The boy stood before the class holding her work in his hands. "I did everything," he declared confidently. The teacher clapped, congratulated him, and never once asked if she had contributed. She sat at her desk, fists clenched under the table, rage boiling, but silent. No one would believe her. To the teacher, she was just the poor girl with the patched bag. The breaking point came during a school assembly. It was a bright morning. Rows of students stood in the grand hall, sunlight glinting off polished shoes and pressed uniforms. She stood among them, holding her head high despite the whispers swirling around her. The principal was making announcements when suddenly the cruel classmate struck. He tugged at her worn school bag until the stitches tore. In an instant, her books, pencils, and a carefully wrapped piece of bread spilled onto the polished floor. Gasps filled the hall. Then laughter. "Look, her whole life just fell out of her bag," someone shouted. "Even her food is wrapped like trash," another mocked. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather her things. Her face burned as tears threatened to fall, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. The principal frowned but said nothing. Teachers looked away. No one stopped the laughter. In that moment, she was utterly alone. In a world of hundreds, not one hand reached to help her. They wanted her broken. They wanted her to disappear. That night, she sat in her small room holding the torn bag in her lap. Her mother watched silently, pain etched in her face. Finally, she spoke. "If it's too much, you don't have to go back. I cannot bear to see you hurt." The girl shook her head. "If I leave, they win. I will not give them that." She stitched her bag again, each stitch a silent vow. "One day," she whispered, "I will stand in front of them and they will never laugh again." Despite the humiliation, she never gave up. She sat in the front row during lessons, even when teachers doubted her. She studied late into the night, memorizing every page of her books. When her classmates mocked her lunch, she ate quietly, telling herself, "Food is fuel, not shame." Slowly, her intelligence began to surface in small ways. She solved problems others couldn't. She wrote essays with a depth that startled even her teachers. But instead of praise, she was often met with disbelief. "Did you really write this yourself?" a teacher asked once, eyebrows raised. She nodded. The teacher handed back her paper without a smile. Her victories were stolen, her efforts ignored. But within her, the fire only grew stronger. They thought humiliation would crush her spirit. But humiliation became her armor. The answer lies not in her silence nor in the tears she refuses to shed, but in her unshakable determination. Every insult, every dismissal, every humiliation, she collects them like stones, stacking them one by one, building the foundation of something greater. The world laughed at her today, but tomorrow the same world would watch in silence as she rose. The humiliation never fully left her. Each laugh, each whisper, each cruel word seemed to echo in her mind long after the day had ended. But instead of crushing her, it sharpened her resolve. While the others lived in the comfort of their wealth, she carried something greater: the fire of determination. At school, she spoke little. She walked with her head lowered, blending into the background whenever she could. But behind the quietness, a storm was brewing, seen only in fleeting moments. Sparks of brilliance that no amount of bullying could smother. One morning, the math teacher scribbled a complex equation across the chalkboard. The class groaned. Most students couldn't even follow the first steps. Confident boys lounged in their seats, muttering, "This is useless." Girls whispered, "Nobody's going to solve that." The teacher, clearly frustrated, called out, "Does anyone know the answer?" Silence filled the room. No one raised a hand. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, her hand went up. The class snickered. "Her? The beggar girl?" someone mocked. The teacher sighed, clearly doubting. "All right then, let's hear it." Her voice trembled at first, but then grew steady as she explained step by step, her chalk tapping the board with certainty. The room fell silent. Every number connected, every calculation was precise. When she finally wrote the answer, the equation balanced perfectly. The teacher froze. The class stared. For the first time, they had no insult ready. "Well, that is correct," the teacher admitted, though his tone lacked enthusiasm. The cruel boy leaned back in his chair, muttering, "Probably just a lucky guess." His friends chuckled nervously, trying to erase the uncomfortable silence. But she knew it wasn't luck. It was hours of study under candlelight, nights of refusing to sleep until she understood every page of her borrowed textbooks. It wasn't just numbers. Her gift extended beyond the logic of equations. In art class, while others lazily painted the same flowers or landscapes, she created something different, scenes from her imagination. A torn piece of paper became a canvas for sunsets she had never seen, oceans she had never touched, faces full of emotions she carried inside. When the teacher displayed the class's work on the wall, hers was tucked into the corner, almost hidden, but anyone who looked closely could see the detail, the passion, the soul inside her brushstrokes. A girl whispered to her friend, "Did she really paint that?" The friend shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Nobody cares." She didn't protest. She didn't need recognition, not yet. But she kept painting, sketching, creating in silence. At home, scraps of paper and broken pencils became treasures. She drew until her fingers cramped, until the candle burned down to nothing but melted wax. Each drawing whispered the same message: "I am more than they think." Books became her secret weapon. She couldn't afford to buy them, but the school library was her sanctuary. When the wealthy students left for their cars and drivers, she stayed behind, sneaking into the dusty corners of the shelves. She devoured stories, science, history, poems. She would copy passages word by word onto scraps of old paper to study later at home. By night she read under the flickering glow of a single candle. Her mother sometimes entered the small room, worried. "You should sleep," she whispered. But the girl shook her head. "I can't. Not yet." Every page was a promise to herself. A promise that she would rise, that her life would not remain small and forgotten. The bullying never stopped. In fact, when classmates noticed small signs of her intelligence, the cruelty grew sharper. "Think you're smarter than us?" sneered one boy. "She probably cheats," another whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "She acts quiet, but she's pretending," girls giggled behind her back. The cruel classmate. Their ringleader smirked whenever she was praised, quickly finding ways to humiliate her again. Once, after she gave a flawless presentation in literature, he spilled ink across her paper, laughing. "Oops. Guess your hard work was for nothing." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The world tried to break her spirit, but she endured. Not because she was weak, but because she was waiting. Waiting for the right moment. The moment when her brilliance would no longer be hidden. Despite the constant cruelty, small victories began to stack quietly in her life. She won first place in a science quiz no one thought she would pass. She wrote an essay so moving that one teacher, unable to hide his admiration, whispered to her, "You have a gift." These moments were brief, often stolen away by jealousy or dismissal, but they planted seeds of hope. At night, she dreamed not of wealth or fancy clothes, but of freedom, the freedom to prove herself, to silence the laughter with undeniable truth. She whispered to her reflection in the cracked mirror, "One day they will see me, not as poor, not as different, but as someone who belongs." For the audience, the tension is electric. They've seen her mocked, humiliated, dismissed, and yet instead of breaking, she quietly grows stronger. The brilliance is there, flickering just beneath the surface, waiting for its explosion. She was patient, enduring every insult, every blow to her pride, because she knew the time had not yet come. But soon the world would see her. And when it did, there would be no laughter, only silence. The days of whispers and cruel laughter had almost become routine. Every insult, every mocking glance, every deliberate act to make her feel small, she had learned to endure them all. But there comes a time when endurance alone is no longer enough. There comes a moment when the weight of humiliation pushes a soul so far that it can only do one of two things: break completely, or rise. For her, that moment arrived one fateful morning. The principal stood before the assembly hall, his voice booming across the polished floor. "Next week, our school will host the annual debate and academic competition. Each class must present a representative. This is your chance to make the school proud." The students cheered. This was the event where reputations were made. The winners earned prestige, admiration, and in some cases, scholarships. For wealthy families, it was just another trophy to polish. But for someone like her, this competition could mean more than pride. It could be a doorway. Yet when the teacher announced her name as one of the participants, the room erupted in laughter. "Her? She can't even afford proper shoes," shouted a boy from the back. "And she thinks she can compete?" sneered another. The cruel classmate smirked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Careful, everyone. She might blind us all with her brilliance." The hall roared with cruel laughter. Her hands trembled, but she didn't back down. Deep inside, something stirred, a flicker of defiance. The bullies weren't satisfied with mocking her. They wanted her to fail publicly, to be crushed so badly she would never dare to lift her head again. They spread rumors that she had no chance. They told teachers she wasn't ready. They even swapped her notes with blank pages the night before the competition. The cruel boy whispered to his friends, "Just wait. Tomorrow she'll embarrass herself in front of the whole school. She'll finally learn her place." But they didn't know what nights had taught her. They didn't know about the countless hours under candlelight, the scribbled pages of practice speeches, the way she whispered arguments to herself while scrubbing dishes at home. They didn't know that their cruelty was only sharpening her blade. The competition day arrived. The grand hall was filled with parents, teachers, and students, the air buzzing with anticipation. Contestants stood on stage in neatly pressed uniforms. She stood among them, her uniform faded, her shoes worn, yet her posture straighter than it had ever been. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Why is she even here? She'll embarrass the whole class. Watch. She'll forget her words." Her heart pounded, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. The first rounds went as expected. Confident, wealthy students delivered polished speeches, their voices ringing with rehearsed authority. The judges nodded, the audience applauded. Then it was her turn. She stepped forward. Before she could even open her mouth, the cruel classmate whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Don't faint, peasant girl. The stage is expensive." Laughter rippled through the hall. Her throat tightened. For a split second, she wanted to run. Her palms sweated, her knees trembled. Every insult from years past seemed to rise and crash over her at once. The judges glanced impatiently, expecting her to crumble. The audience leaned forward, eager for a show. The bullies smirked, certain this would be her final humiliation, and then something inside her shifted. She looked up slowly, her eyes sweeping across the laughing faces. Her voice, when it came, was steady, stronger than anyone expected. "You've always told me I don't belong here. That I'm too poor, too different, too small. And maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong here in your world of wealth and privilege. But today I'm not here to prove I belong to you. I'm here to prove I belong to myself." Silence fell. The laughter died. Even the cruel boy froze, his smirk faltering. Then she launched into her speech. Her words weren't polished with expensive tutors or rehearsed with private coaches. They were raw, real, and burning with the truth of her life. She spoke of struggle, of hunger, of humiliation, of nights spent studying by candlelight. She spoke of dreams, not for luxury but for dignity, for the right to stand equal. "Knowledge," she declared, her voice rising, "is not owned by the rich. Courage is not bought with money. And greatness does not come from the clothes we wear, but from the fire that refuses to die inside us." The hall was silent, not a cough, not a whisper. Even the judges leaned forward, their pens frozen in midair. She didn't just recite facts or arguments. She told a story. Her story, one that pierced every heart in the room. When she finished, her final words hung in the air like a challenge. "You wanted me to be small forever, but I am not small. Not anymore." For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Then slowly, applause began. One teacher clapped, then another. Soon the entire hall erupted, the sound shaking the stage. Students who once laughed at her sat frozen, their faces pale with shock. The cruel boy clenched his fists, unable to speak. The judges exchanged glances. They didn't just see a competitor. They saw a force that could not be ignored. She stepped down from the stage, her head held high, her heart pounding not with fear, but with triumph. That day was supposed to break her. That stage was supposed to humiliate her. But instead it became her fire. In a single moment, the girl they mocked refused to be silent. And from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The room still buzzed from her breaking point speech, yet no one realized, and that was only the beginning. What happened next would not just silence her bullies. It would leave the entire hall breathless. The debate wasn't over. The final round was the toughest, solving a surprise problem on stage. No prepared speeches, no memorized lines, on only wit, courage, and brilliance in the heat of the moment. The principal cleared his throat. "Here is your question," he said, reading from the card. "If you were given the power to change one thing in society, what would it be and how would you do it? You will each have 5 minutes." A hush fell over the hall. This wasn't just about knowledge. This was about vision. The first contestant, a wealthy boy in a crisp suit, stepped forward. He spoke about technology, quoting famous leaders and throwing in big words. The judges nodded politely, but his speech felt rehearsed, hollow. The second contestant, another rich girl, spoke about education. Her words were polished but lacked depth. It was clear she was repeating lessons taught by her private tutor. Then came her turn. The poor girl walked to the center of the stage. No script, no expensive vocabulary, just her worn-out shoes tapping against the polished wood. She looked out at the sea of faces, some expectant, some skeptical, some still mocking. And then calmly she began. "If I could change one thing in society," she said, her voice steady, "I would change the belief that greatness belongs only to the rich." The hall stilled. The judges froze, pens in hand. "I have lived my life hearing that I don't belong, that my place is in the shadows, not on this stage, that education, success, and respect are rewards for those born with wealth. But I stand here to tell you that belief is a lie." Her words cut through the air like a blade. Greatness is not inherited. It is not worn like jewelry or purchased with money. It is built in the silence of nights when you study by candlelight. It is forged in the hunger that drives you to keep going when everyone tells you to stop. It is born from struggle, from pain, from the fire that refuses to go out. A ripple went through the audience. Teachers leaned forward. Students shifted uncomfortably. The rich classmates who once mocked her now stared wide-eyed, their laughter long gone. "But how would I change this belief?" she continued. "By showing the world, by standing here in front of you, proving that poverty is not weakness, that intelligence, talent, and courage are not bound by money. I am not supposed to be here, and yet here I am, competing, speaking, daring, and if I can stand here, then so can countless others you've overlooked." The crowd was silent, the kind of silence that comes when words strike too deep to ignore. For a brief second she paused. Her eyes scanned the hall, the wealthy students in disbelief, the bullies shrinking in their seats, the teachers blinking back tears. Then, she finished with words that would echo far beyond that day. "You asked what I would change. I would change the world's definition of who matters. Because today, I'm no longer the poor girl you tried to silence. I'm the voice you will never forget. Not a single clap, not a single whisper, just silence. A silence so heavy it pressed into every corner of the hall. The judges sat frozen, their faces pale with awe. Teachers who once pitied her now looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Students who mocked her couldn't lift their eyes. Even the cruel boy who orchestrated her humiliation sat slumped in his chair, his smirk long gone. Then, slowly, a single clap rang out. A teacher. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted in applause so thunderous it shook the stage. The judges leaned together, whispering furiously. One of them wiped his glasses, muttering, "Remarkable, truly remarkable." Another shook his head, saying, "She's beyond brilliant. This isn't just an answer. This is history." Her classmates who once laughed now sat in stunned silence, their pride shattered. The cruel boy clenched his fists under the table, his face burning red with humiliation. But none of that mattered to her. She stood tall, her heart pounding not with fear but with triumph. In all my years of judging this competition, I have never witnessed such clarity, such passion, such truth. Today, this young woman has not only answered the question, she has changed us. Ladies and gentlemen, the winner is clear. He gestured toward her. The girl who proved that greatness knows no wealth. The hall exploded again in applause. Some students rose to their feet. Teachers wiped their eyes. Parents in the audience exchanged stunned looks. She had done it. Not only had she belonged, and she had surpassed them all. That day she did not just win a competition. She shattered an illusion. The poor girl they laughed at had risen higher than any of them imagined. And from that moment on, she was no longer defined by poverty or pity. She was defined by brilliance, by courage, by the revelation that revelation did not fade quickly. It lingered, echoing in whispers and conversations long after the competition ended. For the first time since she entered that school, the poor girl was no longer invisible, no longer a target for mockery. She had turned the ridicule into respect, and respect into something much greater. The next day, the campus was different. Normally, she walked the corridors with her head down, clutching her torn bag while students laughed behind her. But that morning, silence followed her footsteps. Not the silence of disdain, but of awe. Some students stared in open admiration. Others looked away, ashamed of the cruel words they had once thrown at her. The same whispers that once mocked her shoes and faded uniform now carried a new tone. "That's the girl from yesterday. She was incredible. Did you hear what she said? I can't get it out of my head." The poor girl, who had once been defined only by poverty, was now defined by power, the power of her voice. Her mind, her courage, even the bullies, the ones who had laughed the loudest, felt the shift. The ringleader, the wealthy boy who once prided himself on humiliating her, could no longer meet her eyes. His friends, once his eager audience, now kept their distance. At lunch he tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. It was just one speech, he muttered, but no one echoed him. They all remembered too clearly the look on his face when she stood on stage and dismantled everything he believed about wealth and superiority. A few days later, something even more unexpected happened. One of the bullies approached her quietly away from the crowd. He shuffled his feet, avoiding her gaze. I just wanted to say sorry," he whispered. "We were wrong about you." For a moment she said nothing. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once. Not with bitterness, not with gloating, but with quiet strength. The power dynamic had changed forever. The transformation was not only among the students. The teachers, too, began to see her differently. One teacher, who had once scolded her for not fitting in, now called her the brightest mind in the room. Another, who had pitied her silently, now praised her publicly, saying, "You are an example to all of us. Intelligence is not measured by wealth." The principal himself invited her to his office. He congratulated her on her performance, his voice tinged with both pride and guilt. He admitted that even he had doubted her when she first arrived, believing she would struggle. "You've proven us all wrong," he said. "You belong here more than anyone." For the first time, she left his office not as a charity case, but as a student who had earned her place. Word of her speech spread beyond the school walls. Parents who had been in the audience retold her words at dinner tables. Teachers shared the story with colleagues from other schools. Soon, her name became a symbol, the poor girl who stood against wealth and prejudice and triumphed. Local newspapers picked up the story. A small article appeared. "Scholarship student delivers powerful speech, leaves audience in awe." Though short, it carried weight. Her story was no longer confined to whispers in hallways. It was reaching strangers, inspiring people who had never met her. But the greatest transformation was not how others saw her. It was how she began to see herself. For years, she had carried the heavy weight of inferiority, believing the cruel whispers that she didn't belong. She had measured her worth by her shoes, her bag, her food. But now, standing in the mirror, she saw not the poor girl from the slums, but a fighter. A girl with fire in her eyes who had faced a world of wealth and arrogance and won. Her confidence grew, not into arrogance, but into steady strength. She began raising her hand in class more often, answering questions without fear. She volunteered in discussions, sharing ideas that stunned even the brightest students. For the first time, she wasn't hiding her light. Her transformation also inspired others, even those who once ignored her. A younger student, also from a poor background, approached her one afternoon. His voice trembled with admiration as he said, "Because of you, I believe I can do it too." She smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Never let them tell you that you don't belong," she said. "Your worth is not in their eyes, it's in yours." That small moment showed the ripple effect of her courage. She was no longer just surviving her place in the elite school. She was becoming a symbol for every outsider who had ever felt small. By the end of the term, the balance of the school had changed. The same students who once mocked her now sought her help with assignments. Teachers quoted her lines in class. Even the bullies who had tormented her now walked carefully, aware that the girl they once ridiculed had become a force they couldn't crush. She had shifted from outsider to leader, from mocked to admired, from overlooked to unforgettable. Her transformation was not marked by wealth or new clothes. She did not suddenly become rich. She did not need to. What changed was greater, the way the world saw her and the way she saw herself. The poor girl who entered the school as a symbol of pity had emerged as a symbol of power. And in her transformation, She proved a truth the world had long denied. Poverty may shape you, but it does not define you. The school year marched on, but nothing returned to the way it once was. The poor girl, once the target of ridicule, had rewritten her story. Every step she took now carried a quiet dignity, the dignity of someone who had endured storms and stood tall afterward. No one dared laugh at her torn bag anymore. No one mocked her old shoes, for those objects were no longer signs of poverty. They were symbols of her resilience. She had worn them into battle, and with them she had conquered hearts and silenced doubters. Her transformation was not about glittering prizes or material wealth. She didn't suddenly arrive at school in a limousine, nor did she replace her faded uniform with silk. No. Her triumph was quieter, deeper, and infinitely more powerful. She had won respect. She had won dignity. She had shown that brilliance and courage can live in the humblest of homes, and that true worth cannot be stitched into expensive fabric or carried in a designer bag. The world around her saw wealth as the measure of greatness. She taught them a different truth. Resilience, talent, and heart are the real treasures. The school itself was never the same again. The students who once thought power lay only in money now carried her story in their minds. Some grew softer, kinder, more cautious with their words. Teachers became more attentive to the quiet students in the back rows, wondering what hidden gifts might be waiting in silence. Even the bullies, though they still carried pride, had learned a lesson they could not unlearn. Their laughter had been silenced, their arrogance dismantled by the very girl they had dismissed. At night, she often sat by the small window of her modest home, books spread across the table, a dim lamp flickering beside her. She thought of the journey, the whispers, the stares, the humiliation. She remembered the tears she never let them see. And then she thought of that day, and the day she stood tall, the day the hall went silent, the day she discovered not only her gift, but also her strength. She whispered to herself, as if promising the child she once was, "I am not what they said I was. I am what I chose to become." She walked into a school where she didn't belong, but left proving she was greater than anyone imagined. Poverty was her beginning, not her end. Her story reminds us that the measure of a person is not in the riches they inherit, but in the courage they carry, the dreams they fight for, and the brilliance they refuse to hide. The poor girl had carried nothing with her except determination, and that had been enough to move an entire world. Wealth fades. Beauty fades. Status can crumble in a moment. But resilience, courage, and talent, these are eternal. They are not bought but built. They are not given but earned. The girl's journey is a mirror for us all. How many times have we looked at someone and judged them by their clothes, their background, their lack of wealth? How many times have we mistaken silence for weakness or poverty for worthlessness? Her story teaches that greatness often hides in the places we least expect. What if the person you look down on today is the very one who will inspire the world tomorrow? Would you still laugh at them? Or would you pause long enough to see the fire in their eyes?